Alright mates, welcome back to the channel. JL Scott Fishing. Hope everybody is doing well this January wintertime season. I thought I'd do a video here. Some mates asked me some questions about the lipless crankbaits because, you know what, jerkbaits can't have all the fun, you know what I mean? Plus getting ready to pack out for Lake Murray. And so it was kind of like the perfect really segue, you know, for talking about Lake Murray and also talking about wintertime to springtime transitions and kind of what happens and why lipless crankbaits are like the go-to for so many anglers during the springtime and into pre-spawn, and why they are so effective. And people have this notion that lipless crankbaits are only really effective in the spring, and that's, you know, it's the same. Lipless falls in the same category as jerkbait, where people put it down way too early. And they only think that they can fish it certain times of the year, and it's really not the case. It's more body fishery specific. As long as you have grass, for the most part, you're going to be fine. Doesn't matter whether you're in Florida all the way up here in the Northeast and all of that. It's really predicated on the techniques that you want to utilize in in grass. Grass areas for the most part, or flats and things like that. Here we've got like Susquehanna Flats with a ton of grass, and you work those outside edges. Tidal Potomac, again, low tide and high tide differentiators in terms of what you do. Working outside grass lines, inside grass lines, all of that stuff depending on the tide. All that falls into prime territory for a lipless crankbait. And there are tons and tons of different styles of lipless, right? We all, if you're old school, more or less, I mean, most people would characterize me as more old school in terms of how I fish and my mentality, being over 50, in terms of, how I perceive, like, the old rattle trap versus the new style lipless crankbaits, which are pretty innovative. And some of them can be upwards of $12 to $15, depending on, obviously, the brand and where it's coming from. But, there's this notion, obviously, I've talked about it before. I'm doing a whole Crawdad series project in investigating that. And everyone always, kind of the myth has always been that springtime, it's got to be red, right? It's got to be red. And a lot of times that is equated with crawl. And it really comes down to the fact that nobody has any other logical explanation to equate it to why red can be so effective in the spring, right? So it's got to be the crawl. But the problem is red is also highly effective in impoundments and reservoirs that do not have any crawl at all. Because it doesn't have anything to do with the crawfish. Okay? That's a myth that's been passed down generationally. It's also been used for marketing purposes. If you go to Dick's, if you go to Academy, if you go to Bass Pro, if you go to any major big box store and you go looking down for lipless crankbaits and you go down and look at, and crankbaits in general, it's basically a crawl section and everything else, shad, everything else, right? But it's predominantly heavily in crawl, but not all parts of the country get that bright red. This bright red crawl is predominantly known for the red swamp, or like the Louisiana species of crawl. So certainly in the deep south, your crawfish are going to get this color, right? But in the Northeast and in the Mid-Atlantic, we do have some of that red swamp crawl that was introduced mostly by live bait fishermen. We've got the rusty crawl, which has a little bit of red, like a red patch on the sides, but it doesn't go full-blown red. There's really not that dominant red crawfish in our river systems. They're really not. They're more green pumpkin, brown. They've got hints of red. Now, the older they get, if they survive past year 2 or 3, they do tend to get red. Okay, that's a fact. But they're predominantly, so I encourage folks this year to just kind of get an idea of what you're looking at in your water. I've got a bunch of videos up on YouTube, and on TikTok, that show, the actual live crawl from the Upper Potomac, the Allegheny, and the Susquehanna throughout the year. They all look different because they're different species of crawfish. Maryland has about 14 species of crawfish within our river systems. Virginia has, I think, 12 or so. Of those 14, 5 of them are invasive, meaning they're not native. Okay, they're not native. They were introduced either through migration from the Ohio River Basin into, river systems in Pennsylvania and then down, or they were brought in by us, people who bring live fish with live crawl and are buying they're buying Asian crawl, they're buying whatever the crawfish species are in the commercial markets, right, that they can use as live bait, same as shrimp, things like that happen. People that fish with live shrimp gets introduced into the system. The problem is a lot of these are invasive, and they just take over. Rusty crawl has pretty much taken over many river systems in Pennsylvania. It's not native to Pennsylvania. It's not native to Maryland, okay? And we have them now. Virel, a couple other the crawl stuff. So check out the crawl series. But it's important that you do have some crawl pattern lipless crankbaits, okay? And most of the ones that are that work just fine are your rattle. These are the old traditional rattle traps, right? Why are they called rattle traps, right? Because of the rattle. Very simple, right? Lightweight, very light, very shallow presentations, right? Quarter ounces. I mean, that's your traditional thing. One of the famous, obviously, that color with the chartreuse bottom will catch you fish anywhere. They don't have to have crawl. And the reason is it has more to do with light, okay? And I talk about this a lot, and most of the people that I talk to in person, I can get more in depth about it, especially when we're out in the water. When you watch the sun come through that water column in the winter time, it is completely different than in the spring and in the summer, right? And, of course, in the fall. In the wintertime, what's happening in your water? Okay? Not much, right? It's dead. Grass is dead, right? Forage species have died off, right? There's a lot of inactivity, okay, in your system from a photosynthesis, okay, biology perspective, right? Okay? And so the light is coming in right to the bottom. You can, especially if you're in like 2-3 feet of water, you can just see the light. And then you can get an idea from your boat or from your kayak out there. Work your baits close to your boat to watch how the light reacts with your baits. Okay? Because that's what's happening further out from you when you're fishing these baits in different times of the year. The reason why red is so effective early spring is the grass, the plankton, everything about a fishery waking up, right, hasn't happened yet. So there's not like a lot of things in the water, okay, that's interacting with clarity, unless you've got high water events or all that stuff that's natural that, is different. I mean, just normal conditions, right? This is why the red becomes so effective. It has nothing to do with crawl. It has to do with the color in the water. Remember, bass are seeing in tones of red and green. That's it. Okay? This notion that they see in black and white and shades of gray and is disputed by a lot of people in the scientific community. They have conals that pick up greens and reds. Okay? And so that's why a lot of people also associate with chartreuse being so effective and red being so effective, because we know from the studies that their conals in their eyes, that they can see those better than any other colors for whatever reason. Okay? And so that's kind of like where. So can you catch bass obviously with red in the spring? Yes. But that's not the only color you should be utilizing, especially if you're in areas that do not have any crawl at all. Okay? You can match your forage with your lipless crankbaits to your impoundments, your reservoirs, your ponds, things like that you want to throw your lipless. And really it all comes down to technique on how you can throw a lipless. Lipless crankbaits unfortunately, have the same kind of reputation in terms of use case as chatterbaits do. Everybody wants to cast and burn. Most people want to cast and burn it. okay? Which is certainly an effective technique in warm water. That's not going to work for you in the wintertime, right? We all know that. Wintertime, everything slows down. Moving baits aren't nearly as effective unless there's a rising water event, something like that of a nature. Like you get the snow melting up north, it raises the rivers down in the mid-Atlantic, and you get a little bit more of that. It kind of wakes up the bass, especially smallmouth, a little bit, and then they shut back down, okay? It's kind of a short window, right? Whereas in the summertime, there are people who will just go out and throw a chatterbait all day long, and they're highly effective. I mean, they catch fish. And so that's what people do, is they just burn it. They just keep burning. Whopper ploppers, just burning it. Okay, warm water temperatures. Cold water, not going to be nearly as effective. Okay, the bass are not going to want to chase, right? And so then you want to go to, which is harder to do, these are more shallow burns, okay? Grass line, shallow water, 4 feet, perfect rattles, right? That's why they're called rattle traps, okay? Different, subtle to the rattles, okay? Perfect. You want to go 4 to 6 feet or to 10 feet, right? You'll need to change your lipless crankbait. The style, the weight, the shape, okay, the structure. And what you're really looking for are those that are that flat side. See how wider that is? This is where the weight comes in, okay? Compared to, okay, see the difference? Look at the difference in that. Okay, that's the bottom, and then that's the top. Okay, big difference, all right? Which contributes to a lot of your depth and how far you can get, and also the techniques that you can use. So, pattern here, this is a smallmouth B52, okay? Lipless crankbait, which you can work in 10 plus feet of water highly effectively, okay? And this bait actually, because of its weight, actually is very, very effective. More effective, in my opinion, than these in tidal fisheries because of the current and the tide and just in the water, okay, of working through water, okay, of what you're up against, as well as in current, okay, and things like that. If you want to throw your lipless in current seams and things like that, because you're thinking outside the box, most people aren't doing that, right? Most people are staying shallow with their lipless crankbaits, staying in the grass and working all that. But again, lipless crankbaits are also highly effective in the middle of your river, okay, in rocky areas, okay, where you can bounce them off, okay. So that was the smallmouth, and this is the largemouth, okay. Now, why would I want to pack these for Lake Murray, right? Okay, as well as a bluegill pattern, right? Same, and then the crappie pattern, okay? Why are those forage species going in the box for Lake Murray, as well as the crawl? Because in reality is, you don't really know what the bite's going to be on Lake Murray, okay, in February, right? Late January, and then again in February, okay? You don't really know. It's the wintertime, right? And so, crawl haven't woken up yet in the Saluda River, where they're predominantly crawl, okay? There are some crawl areas in the shallows of McMurray as well, in the different pockets. And you may want to go, okay, mid-lake, deeper water, bass suspending, okay? And you may still want to go with a lipless crankbait. Because one, they can be considered search baits as well. But the weight of everything that you do, the weight of this bait, okay, gets you down to 10 feet plus, okay? This will not. These rattle traps will not get you down there, okay? So if you're fishing offshore and you want to go into 8, 10, 12, 14 feet of water, you're going to want that 3/4 ounce. You're going to want that heavier, and you're also going to want to go to the knock, okay? My experience is just my own, and I mean, I can't speak to other people's experiences because of how I fish, where I fish predominantly in less than 5 feet of water 90% of the time of the year, okay? Fishing for smallmouth. Doesn't matter whether it's fly fishing, doesn't matter whether it's spinning, Doesn't matter. Wade fishing, kayak fishing, jet boat fishing, doesn't matter, okay? That's primarily where 90% of my, and the rest of it is lakes and impoundments, grass, flipping grass, or tidal Potomac, okay? And so there are different ways you can use that lipless crankbait. And you guys are familiar with a lot of the techniques. The yo-yo, okay, is incredibly effective, especially this time of year. Caught quite a few smallies in December, just simply letting the lipless crankbait fall and twitching it up. And letting it fall and twitching it up. Okay, fishing it like a jig or a spoon. Okay, simple technique. You can do that in deeper water. And so what I've also found for me, and I think a lot of it also stems from a lot of times, this is when you're wade fishing, is if you drag your rod with your lipless crankbait, you know, the same way you may do your twitch pause with a jerkbait, okay, but you just kind of drag it. What happens is that vibration of that jerkbait just goes crazy. You're just dragging it, right? You're not reeling it. You're dragging your rod, okay, and it's pulling it, okay, and darting it, right? And that's when you're going to get strikes, in my opinion, my experience, in deeper water. Now, the other side of the lipless crankbait that I'm looking to pack is, because I will be in Murray. I know it's kind of an interesting dynamic this year. My gut and experience tells me to stay shallow, okay, because that's how I've always fished Lake Murray. Up in the river shallow, or up in the mid-lake, North Lake, Newberry, Lexington County, okay, so in the grass, submerged vegetation, doesn't matter the depth, submerged vegetation, upper mid-lake, big birds, Snug Harbor, Lominic, the Point, those areas right above. So you got drier, and then you got a bunch of these creeks that go up in Lake Murray above that, north of that, okay? There's a lot of grass. The grass isn't going to be there in 2 weeks, isn't going to be there in 6 weeks, okay? It will begin to get there, but there will still be the remnants, right? And there's also resident fish that live in the up in the top creeks and bottoms of Lake Murray. And then you'll also have the transition, okay, that will occur at some time, most likely, depending on the weather, right around the end of March and February on Lake Murray, right? Obviously, that is a huge lake for docks, mid-lake, huge lake for jig fishing, crankbaits, lipless cranks, in the river, depending on what the weather is, how cold it's going to be the rest of January going into February, all that's going to matter. But one of the cool things with lipless crankbaits is you can actually now incorporate that into your live scope techniques, like you would your jerkbait. Because now you can do your yo-yo, and you can do your jig style fishing with your heavier, larger lipless, where you're going to yo-yo it, pop it, let it fall, pop it, let it fall, using live scope. Once you've located your fish, and drop it right down on it, okay? The same way a lot of people use that live scope for jerk baits, right? In big water, open water, offshore, all of that. Schooling fish, all that stuff. So it'll be interesting. 2023, a lot more people have live scope. It'll be depending upon whether or not, for me, if I'm out as a co, and again, if the boater is fishing a technique and he's using live scope, and he could be doing any number of things, I would be in the back of the boat, most likely doing finesse lipless crankbait fishing. You're like, finesse, okay? Because in reality, if you're ripping this is power, okay? You're basically casting and burning, okay? That's like power. That's like power fishing, right? Doesn't matter. Burning top water, right? Same thing, okay? In my opinion. Finesse is a little bit nuanced, and your finesse lipless are a little bit different. This, or these two, are more finesse lipless crankbaits. Okay, here's a crawl pattern, bluegill pattern. Okay? Rattle and a knock, just rattle. Okay? But these are going to get deeper than these rattle traps. Okay? Got a little bit more weight to them. They've got a lot more inside, and plus the noise, right? And the knocker. And so it's a little bit different presentation where you finesse them a little bit. Okay? And you work them in the grab. Now, one of the other parts, it's not really, in terms of finesse style, but it's just a different style are these. These from Willamette Weapon Lures. So look at the shape on these, okay? So I've got a crawl pattern. You can see the crawl dots on the back, okay? And I've got a black and blue pattern, okay? And these cut through the water completely different. Look how streamlined these are, okay? It's rounded, okay? It's completely rounded. Weight, I can get these down, okay? Down. And pop them back up and down. Or you can also rip them through. But they're so streamlined because everything's rounded. That water, as you're working it, just comes through. It goes through the water, okay? A lot differently than your other lipless crankbaits, okay? So it's just another different style of techniques that you can do in terms of how you fish your lipless. These, for me, the finesse lipless are the baits that primarily I like to tie on spinning gear. Okay? So medium heavy rod, like a medium heavy Fitzgerald Vursa, and a, spinning 7.2 medium heavy. If it's a Stunner HD series from Fitzgerald rod, go with the 7.3, the 7.3 medium heavy Stunner. If you're fishing on a bait caster, that is where I go more. I prefer like a 7.6. So like 7.6 moderate fast, medium heavy like casting rod from Fitzgerald. That you can use Vursa. I think the Thrift series also has a quality one. But you really want your load ratio, bait caster like 7.3 to 1, your reel. You really want your load ratio to be in flex to be high when you're lipless crankbait fishing, okay? Especially if you're yo-yoing, okay? Think about that because of how you want to make sure that you get that hookup ratio that you want. The other thing about it is, other thing it can work for if you're smallie fishing, like what I do primarily, is you want to change your hooks out. Most of them are going to have a 4, like a number 4 treble. I like to downsize hooks oftentimes for smallie because their mouth is a little bit different and actually get better hookups. They can't throw that one as effectively as, say, a bigger hook. Like, a lot of times people don't change out hooks on their crankbaits, and a lot of times, or in their jerkbaits, for example, and smallies will throw it, okay? Because they don't get their mouth completely around. On a smaller hook, it gets stuck in there, in my opinion, in their jaws, in that mouth area, a little bit more, and less, you have less disconnects and that. So that's an interesting thing you can do. People also, obviously, will change out. I like to use red. Like, you can tell how beat up this one's gotten. I'll replace that one before I go to Murray. We'll either use 2 red treble hooks or 1. I prefer, if I'm going to do the single treble hook, red colored, I prefer to put the red on the front. That way when it comes, if you're a subscriber to the Belief in the red, it's going to come up and hit to the front as opposed to hitting from the back. Mates are also now putting on hair and other things to the back treble hook as well on lipless crankbaits, which, can be highly effective. Line-wise, I prefer to go with a 12-pound PLine Flourocarbon. That's what I like to use. That's going to get, because that just really, on my spinning gear, that just works really effectively in the water columns that I fish. You obviously can go as high, I would go 15 would be the max I would go. Because remember, that is what's going to dictate really how effective and how deep your lipless go. okay, in your water column. When you target those fish on live scope, or you're fishing offshore at Lake Murray or Lake Anna, places like that, you know, you want to think about those kind of things. From the rod selection, a lot of people ask me about the Fitzgerald rods, and from the rod selection is like, you want to make sure that, like, if you're going out recreationally, if you're in the Upper Potomac or places like that, you want those rods that are going to be very effective for you for bass, walleye, and muskie. Okay, so you want to consider that if you're looking for a new rod in 2023. You want to get a rod because you're going to come into, especially the walleye now in river systems in Virginia and in Maryland now in the Upper Potomac. You're going to start to come into more walleye. Okay, and so you want a rod that's going to, you know, basically, you know, get you effectively bites with your smallmouth or your targeted bass, but also other species that you come into. And so you want to keep that in mind. That hooks wise, I like owner. I like owner trebs. You know, obviously there's, you know, Gamakatsu. There's tons. There's, you know, that you can opt out for that. Size wise on these, you're looking at 1/4 ounce to 1/2 ounce. To even larger on some of these lipless. So with the knockers and the rattles, one thing I want you to keep in mind that vibration, the tight wobble, think about this for crankbaits. Why right now there are small crankbaits so effective right now in the wintertime? Because they've got a tight wobble, right? Really tight. What does that mean? That tight vibration, okay, is less about wobble than it is about noise. That vibration in the water creates noise in the water column for the bass. Every bit as much as the rattle. Okay? The vibration of you moving that lipless crankbait in a tight fashion, okay, creates even a noise. Okay? And so if you've ever seen those like noise, like busting up bluegill, you know, that people used to have with their they used to put down with their trolling motors and their electronics, right? That would create noise and send the noise out into the water of like bluegill, busting on bait, all that kind of stuff. That's the noise that really the rattle is what is triggering the fish. Is that natural noise that the other species in your water system are making. Okay? So don't lose sight of that when you wanting that tight, you know, crankbait wobble in the wintertime. And why that's so effective is also, you know, it's mimicking that noise through the vibration every bit as much as the rattle. So that's why a crankbait that you know, or silent, even a silent lipless, right? It doesn't have any rattle or knocker at all, is going to make noise in the water column because of its vibration. Because it's going to send that wave through the water, and then the bass is going to pick up on that as noise. That there's something different. That's why these colors are so effective in stained water and muddy water. Okay? They're seeing the hue of it, but they're really going for that noise is what's dragging them to it before they actually can see any of the colors. That's why it's vitally important in the spring that if you're throwing a red, that you definitely need the rattle or the knocker for your lip. All right, mates. Hope you enjoyed this. Please like and subscribe to the channel. You can find me this weekend fly fishing and wine festival in Doswell outside Richmond, Virginia, followed by the Richmond Expo, which is the following week at Meadow Event Park in Doswell. Following that, it's Rocky Top, Tennessee, Knoxville, Tennessee, for the East Tennessee show. And then after that, I think the next show is Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in February. So, again, please like and subscribe to the channel. Please comment. Follow me on TikTok, JL Scott Fishing. Hope everybody has a great day.